Nicki Minaj never imagined she would stand in front of a congregation and preach the word of God. The world knew her as a rapper, an artist, a performer who commanded the stage and the spotlight. But none of that prepared her for this. None of that made her ready to face the Bible, the pulpit, and the weight of the people's expectations. And yet, here she was. The church was quiet, the lights dimmed just enough to create an atmosphere of reverence, but the air was thick with anticipation. The congregation sat quietly, their eyes fixed on the woman standing at the front. They had come to hear the word, but they had also come to see Nicki Minaj, the woman who had made her mark in the world with her iconic flow, her colorful personality, and her unapologetic confidence. Now, she was standing there in front of them, a different kind of leader, a different kind of voice. She had traded in her bright wigs, her flashy costumes, and her stage presence for a simple white robe, the sound of her heels clicking sharply on the church floor as she walked to the pulpit. Nicki cleared her throat, the mic echoing slightly. She wasn't used to the stillness. The silence that came with speaking the word of God felt different from the silence before a performance. The kind of silence that made her feel small, uncertain. But she wasn't going to back down. She had come this far, and she wasn't going to let fear control her now. "Good morning, everyone," she said, her voice steady, though her insides churned. A few people nodded. A few whispered amongst themselves, unsure of what to make of this new iteration of Nicki Minaj. There were murmurs of excitement, but also doubt. Could she really do this? Could she really preach the gospel with the same passion she brought to her music? Nicki could feel their eyes on her, could sense the weight of their expectations. But it was more than that. She could feel a deep connection to the words she was about to speak, words that she had come to understand in a way that she hadn't before. "I know you didn't expect me to be standing here today." "I didn't either," Nicki said, her voice softening as she began to reveal the truth she had been hiding for so long. "But let me tell you, this is my purpose. I've spent so much of my life chasing the spotlight, chasing success, chasing fame. I thought that was what I needed to feel whole. But I was wrong. I was empty inside, and I had no idea why." She paused, letting her words sink in. "I spent years building an image, a persona that was bigger than life. I thought if I made myself untouchable, no one could hurt me. I thought if I showed the world my strength, no one would see the cracks. But the cracks were there, and I couldn't hide from them anymore." The room was silent. People shifted in their seats, unsure of where this was going. Nicki had always been bold, always been larger than life. This felt different. This felt raw. She wasn't Nicki Minaj the rapper anymore. She wasn't the queen of hip-hop. She was just a woman, standing in front of people, seeking answers. Seeking redemption. "I've been through a lot in my life. I've made mistakes. I've hurt people, and I've been hurt in return," she continued, her voice trembling ever so slightly. "But in the end, it was God's grace that pulled me through. It was His love that reminded me that I am not defined by my past. I am not defined by the things I've done. I am defined by the love He has for me. And that's what I'm here to share with you today." Nicki looked out at the crowd, trying to steady herself. She wasn't used to vulnerability. She wasn't used to this side of herself, but it felt right. It felt like it was the only way to speak the truth. She had spent so long hiding behind her persona, but now it was time to take it off. "I know some of you may be thinking, who is she to stand here and preach?" Nicki said, the hint of a smile playing on her lips. "You know, I've asked myself that same question 100 times. But I know this, if God can use me, He can use anyone. He doesn't care about your past. He doesn't care about your mistakes. He only cares about your heart." The words came easier now, flowing from a place deep within her that she hadn't realized was there. She wasn't just speaking to the congregation, she was speaking to herself. "I'm here today because I found something that's bigger than the world's definition of success," she said, her eyes glistening with emotion. "I found peace. I found purpose. And it's my mission to share that with you." The crowd was still, hanging on every word. Nicki could feel the shift in the room. The skepticism was slowly fading. They weren't just seeing a celebrity standing before them anymore. They were seeing a woman who had faced the same struggles, the same doubts, and had found something greater than herself. "I've learned that it's okay to not have it all figured out," she said, her voice strong now. It's okay to be broken. It's okay to admit that you don't have all the answers. Because it's in those moments of vulnerability that God can step in and guide you. He can heal the broken places. And when you let Him, He will give you more than you could ever ask for. Nicki stepped back, her eyes still scanning the congregation. She could feel the shift in the room. The energy was different now, more open, more accepting. And as she looked out, she saw something she hadn't expected. She saw hope. I'm here to be a vessel, she said quietly. Not just a celebrity, not just a rapper, but a servant of the Lord. I'm here to share His love with you. I'm here to show you that no matter what you've been through, there's always a way forward. There's always hope. She took a deep breath, feeling the weight of her words settle in her chest. She wasn't sure what the future held. She wasn't sure if this new path would work. But one thing was clear. For the first time in her life, she felt truly alive, not as Nicki Minaj the performer, but as Nicki Minaj the woman of faith. The room remained still, the silence heavy. But this time, it wasn't uncomfortable. This time, it was filled with something else. Something that Nicki hadn't expected to find in the walls of this church. It was peace. The following Sunday, the church was packed again. Nicki stood backstage, feeling the weight of the moment pressing down on her. The excitement from last week had given way to something more subtle, more dangerous, doubt. The congregation had been moved by her words the first time, yes, but could she keep it up? Could she continue to inspire them week after week, or would they eventually see through the veneer of celebrity and find her lacking, just another person pretending to be someone she wasn't? She stared at her reflection in the backstage mirror. Her face, no longer covered by layers of makeup or colorful wigs, looked older, more vulnerable. She had given them a taste of her truth, but what would happen when they demanded more? What if they started to question her authenticity, or worse, what if they started to question her ability to lead? A gentle knock on the door brought her back to the present. Her assistant peeked in. "You're on in 5, Pastor Minaj," she said, a hint of nervousness in her tone. Nicki nodded, straightening her shoulders. She wasn't Nicki Minaj the rapper now. She was Pastor Minaj, and if she wanted to make a real difference, she had to let go of the past and step fully into this role. There was no turning back. The moment she stepped into the pulpit, the energy in the room shifted. She could feel their eyes on her, but this time, it wasn't just curiosity. There was expectation. They were waiting for something real, something that would speak to their souls. She took the mic, letting the silence settle for a few seconds before she spoke. "Good morning," Nicki said, her voice calm but carrying the weight of the room. "I want to talk to you about something today that's been on my heart. I want to talk about faith. Not the kind of faith that you just talk about on Sundays, not the kind of faith you pray for when things are going well. I want to talk about the kind of faith that shows up when everything falls apart." The room was still, every ear listening intently. "See, I've been in a lot of places in my life," Nicki continued. "I've been at the top of the world, standing on stages with millions of people screaming my name. I've had it all, the fame, the money, the admiration. But in all of that, I was empty. I thought success would fill the void, but all it did was create a deeper one. And that's when I realized, things don't fill you up. People don't fill you up. Only God can do that." She paused, letting her words sink in. There was a softness in her voice now, a vulnerability that she hadn't allowed anyone to hear before. "I've been running for a long time, trying to outrun the emptiness, trying to outrun my mistakes, my flaws. I didn't want anyone to see the cracks, but the truth is, they were always there. And the more I tried to cover them up, the bigger they got." She paused again, eyes scanning the room. "But God doesn't want perfection. He wants honesty. And that's the first step toward real faith. You have to be honest about where you are, about what's broken. And it's in that honesty that God can come in and do the real work." A murmur rippled through the congregation. Nicki felt the weight of their attention, but this time, it didn't feel like pressure. It felt like a connection, a bond. They weren't looking at her as the celebrity anymore. They were looking at her as a person, a human being, just like them. "I want to tell you about something I learned," she said, her voice stronger now, more assured. "Faith is not about waiting for everything to fall into place. It's about trusting God, even when it feels like everything is falling apart. It's about saying, I don't have all the answers, but I trust that you do. She took a deep breath, stepping away from the pulpit and walking down the steps toward the congregation. That's the kind of faith I'm learning to have. The kind that lets go of control, the kind that doesn't need to know everything, but just trusts. And it's not easy. It's messy. But it's worth it. The room was silent, but it wasn't the uncomfortable silence of doubt. It was the silence of understanding. Nicki felt something shift in her own heart, a shift she hadn't expected. For the first time in years, she wasn't just performing for an audience. She wasn't playing a role. She was living the message she was speaking. She paused, standing in the middle of the aisle, letting the words sink in. I'm here to tell you that you don't have to be perfect to come to God. You don't have to have everything together. You don't have to put on a show. You just have to be willing to show up. And that's the first step toward healing. I'm learning that. And I hope you are too. Nicki could feel the weight of her vulnerability, the honesty of what she was saying, and for the first time in her life, it didn't feel like weakness. It felt like strength. She wasn't pretending anymore. She was present. I'm still on this journey with you, she continued, her voice softening. I haven't figured it all out. But I'm learning that God doesn't ask for perfection. He just asks for you to trust Him. And if you can do that, then He'll take you places you never imagined. There was a long pause before Nicki finally said, Let us pray. As the congregation bowed their heads, Nicki closed her eyes, letting the stillness wash over her. This was her calling now. Not the music, not the fame. This was where she was meant to be. And maybe, just maybe, this was the real stage. The prayer felt different from anything she had ever done before. It wasn't a performance. It wasn't scripted. It was just her, speaking to God, speaking to the people in the room who were also searching for something real. And for the first time in a long time, Nicki felt whole. Nicki spent the next few days in a kind of whirlwind. The call from her manager had left her unsettled, but she quickly buried the feeling of doubt. She refused to let the shadows of her past life creep back into her present. She had made the decision. The choice was final. But despite her firm resolve, there was something that nagged at her. It was a feeling she hadn't expected, loneliness. There was no one to talk to about this new life she was trying to build. No one who could truly understand. Her friends from the music world were still trying to pull her back into their orbit, sending messages that read like invitations to old parties, glamorous events, and studio sessions. The world she had once dominated felt far away, but the allure was strong. It was a familiar comfort, one she had spent years building. She had once been the center of that world, the queen of rap, the woman who commanded respect and adoration from millions. Now, here she was, standing in front of a small congregation on Sundays, doing her best to be something entirely different. A pastor. A woman of faith. The question sat heavy on her mind. Am I really making a difference? One morning, as Nicki sat in her office at the church, the phone buzzed on the desk. She knew who it was without looking. Her old manager again. She hesitated, then picked up the phone, feeling the weight of her own decisions pressing down on her. Nicki, her manager's voice was all business. I've got something big for you. Not interested, Nicki responded before he could continue. I told you I'm not going back to that life. I've moved on. Come on, he pressed, his tone shifting to something more familiar, something that tugged at Nicki's old self. This isn't just about the music anymore. We're talking about you. Your brand. We've got a major sponsor interested in you. This could launch your ministry to new heights. We're talking millions, Nicki. You're meant for bigger things than this church gig. Nicki closed her eyes, her pulse quickening. It was exactly what she had expected. A business proposition, an invitation to slip back into the persona that had once consumed her. I'm not doing it, she said firmly, trying to silence the temptation in her voice. I'm doing something different. Something real. Real. Her manager laughed, the sound echoing through the phone. Nicki, you've built your career on fantasy. On being someone else. How can you think that this pastor thing is real? People want the show, Nicki. They want the fame, the power, the you they've always known. Don't throw that all away for this church gig. She stood up, the walls closing in. His words hit like daggers, but she wouldn't let him see it. She couldn't. "I've been that person long enough," Nicki said, her voice cold. "I don't want to be her anymore. I'm moving on. I'm not looking for fame. I'm looking for peace." Her manager's silence on the other end of the line was thick, uncomfortable. "Do you really think people will take you seriously as a pastor, Nicki?" he finally asked. "Is that who you are now?" Nicki's eyes blurred, the weight of the question sinking into her chest. She had been wondering the same thing. But she wasn't going to let him see her doubt. "Yes," she said firmly. "That's who I am now." There was a long pause before he spoke again. "All right, Nicki. I'll leave you to your peace. But don't forget, you're a brand. And brands don't just disappear. You can't hide from who you are forever." The call ended. Nicki sat in silence, the phone still pressed to her ear as the room seemed to collapse in on her. She wanted to believe that she had found her true purpose, but there was a part of her that couldn't help but wonder if he was right. Was this really who she was meant to be? The next Sunday, Nicki walked into the church with a weight on her shoulders. It wasn't the same as before. This time, there was no excitement in her step, no rush of adrenaline. She wasn't walking into a world of applause and admiration. She was walking into a room full of people who were waiting for her to lead them, not as a celebrity, but as a servant. And the truth hit her harder than she'd expected. She wasn't sure she could do it. "Good morning," she said as she walked up to the pulpit, her voice lacking its usual confidence. The congregation greeted her, some of them with warm smiles, others with expectant eyes. She didn't know what they saw in her. She didn't know what they wanted from her. For a moment, she stood there, unsure of where to begin. Finally, she found her voice. "I want to talk to you about fear. Fear is something we all carry, whether we like it or not. Fear of failure. Fear of being judged. Fear of not being enough." She paused, looking out over the crowd. "I've been afraid of a lot of things in my life. I've been afraid of being vulnerable. Of being real. I've hidden behind a persona for so long that I didn't even know who I was anymore." Her words felt raw, unfiltered, and for the first time, Nicki felt truly connected to the congregation. She wasn't just performing. She wasn't pretending. She was speaking the truth, her truth. "But God," she continued, her voice gaining strength, "God doesn't care about the persona. He doesn't care about the title, or the fame, or the success. He cares about your heart. And when you finally let go of that fear, when you finally stop hiding behind the mask you've built, that's when you'll start to understand what true peace is." She let the words settle in the room, and for a moment, there was silence. The weight of her honesty hung heavy in the air. She could see it in the eyes of the congregation, the realization that they were all struggling with the same fear, the same uncertainty. Nicki took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment. She had made her choice. This was her purpose. Not the stage, not the fame, not the old life. It was here, standing before these people, speaking the truth. And in that moment, she realized something that she hadn't before. She didn't need the world to validate her. She didn't need the fame or the approval. She had something more now. Something real. Something that couldn't be taken away. "Fear is a liar," she said quietly, looking out at the faces before her. "And once you choose faith over fear, that's when you'll finally be free." Nicki didn't know where this journey would lead. She didn't know what would happen next. But for the first time, she felt at peace with the unknown. She was ready to step fully into this new role, to lead not with her fame, but with her heart. The road ahead would be difficult. There would be doubts, challenges, and temptations. But Nicki Minaj had learned one thing. True peace wasn't about success. It was about knowing who you were, and being willing to let go of everything else. And that was the first step toward finding herself. The days after Nicki's sermon felt like a blur. The flood of emotions, the sudden sense of clarity she had felt when standing at the pulpit, was quickly met with a tide of questions. Was this real? Could she keep doing this? Could she truly abandon her former life and embrace this new calling without looking back? Nicki didn't have the answers, but she knew she couldn't turn back. Not now. The church was filling up more each week, with people who were curious about her message, about her story. She could see their faces, their reactions to her words. They didn't just want to hear about God, they wanted to hear her truth. Her vulnerability. The part of her they hadn't seen before. But that truth, that vulnerability, was harder to embrace than she had expected. And she was beginning to realize that the pull of her old world, her old life, was far stronger than she had imagined. Her manager kept calling, sending messages with offers for interviews, sponsorships, brand deals. He'd even tried to pitch her for a new music collaboration, something that would reintroduce her to the entertainment world. He promised her it could be done on her terms, but Nicki knew it wasn't about that anymore. The offers were tempting, but they felt hollow, empty. She had a new purpose now, one that didn't revolve around the red carpets and the flashing lights. But the temptation was real. Every time the phone rang, she couldn't help but feel a little pull to answer. Every time she saw a tweet or a headline with her name in it, she felt a brief pang of longing for the spotlight. It was Sunday morning again, and Nicki found herself pacing in her small office before the service. She wasn't sure if she was ready. She wasn't sure if she even knew how to preach anymore. Could she continue this path? Was she equipped for this? Or was this just a phase, something she would regret later, when the allure of fame called her back? The door to her office opened, and Pastor Jay, one of the church leaders who had mentored Nicki through the transition, walked in. He was a calm presence, the kind of man who exuded peace without even trying. Nicki's anxiety began to settle the moment she saw him. "Pastor Jay," she said, trying to shake off the weight on her shoulders. "I don't know if I can do this today. I'm not sure I'm ready to stand in front of them and pretend I have it all figured out. I don't want to disappoint them." Pastor Jay smiled, his calm eyes understanding. "Nicki, no one here expects you to have it all figured out. You're human. You're walking this journey just like everyone else. That's why they come to hear you. Not because you're perfect, but because you're real." Nicki leaned against her desk, still unconvinced. "But that's the thing, Pastor Jay. I used to be so sure of who I was. I had a brand, a message. I was the one everyone wanted to hear from. Now, I'm standing here in front of these people, and I don't even know what I'm doing anymore." Pastor Jay walked over to her and placed a hand on her shoulder. "Sometimes, Nicki, the hardest thing is letting go of the identity you've spent so long building. But when you do, that's when you'll find who you really are. You're not here to be the same Nicki Minaj the world knew. You're here to be Nicki, the one who's found peace, the one who's walking in faith. And that's what people are going to see. Your journey is theirs, too. It's not about being perfect, it's about being authentic." Nicki took a deep breath. His words made sense, but the fear still lingered. Could she really be the person she had always wanted to be? The one who stood for something more than fame, more than accolades? Could she be the pastor they needed, or was she just playing pretend? As the service time drew near, she stood up and walked to the front of the church, her heart racing in her chest. The congregation was already gathered, their faces expectant but filled with kindness. They were here for the word of God, but part of them was here for her, too. They wanted to see Nicki Minaj, the woman they had seen on stage, in the news, and on social media, step into this new role. They wanted to see if the woman behind the persona could stand and preach truth, not just perform. She stood at the pulpit, gripping the edges of the lectern, her palms sweating. The congregation waited. She opened her mouth, the words sticking at first, but then, just like last time, it started to flow. She took a deep breath, feeling the Holy Spirit guide her words. "Good morning, church," she began, her voice strong despite the nerves in her chest. "I know some of you are wondering if I'm the right person to stand up here, to lead you. Believe me, I've asked myself the same thing. I spent so many years chasing things that seemed important. Money, fame, success. I thought that was the key to happiness, the key to fulfillment." She paused, letting the words hang in the air. She was speaking not just to them, but to herself. "But I've learned that those things are fleeting. They don't last. What truly lasts is the love of God, the peace that comes from surrendering to Him, and the joy that comes when you realize that you don't have to be perfect. You just have to be willing to be yourself." Nicki let the words settle in. This was the moment she had been preparing for, whether she was ready or not. I've been broken, I've been lost. But God didn't care about that. He doesn't care about your past, your mistakes, or your failures. All He cares about is that you turn to Him. That's the kind of love that doesn't fail. As she spoke, she felt something shift inside of her. It was like the tension she'd been holding onto for so long began to release. She wasn't just talking to the congregation anymore. She was talking to herself, reaffirming everything she had been learning over the past few months. It wasn't about being perfect. It wasn't about impressing anyone. It was about being real. Some of you may feel like you're not enough. Like your mistakes are too big, your past too broken. But that's a lie, she said, her voice growing louder, more powerful. You are enough. And God's grace is bigger than anything you've done. He loves you, just as you are. For the first time since stepping into this new role, Nicki felt at peace. She wasn't pretending to be someone else. She was finally being herself, imperfect, messy, and completely dependent on God. But it was enough. She didn't have to hide anymore. After the service, as the congregation began to leave, many of them came up to thank her. Their words were kind, filled with gratitude for the vulnerability she had shown. And for the first time in a long time, Nicki felt the weight of her purpose. This was it. This was what she had been searching for. And just like that, Nicki Minaj, the woman who had once dominated the stage with her fame and success, had found a new stage to stand on, one that was bigger than any stage she had ever known. Nicki had settled into the rhythm of her new life, until the day the old world came crashing back. It was just another Sunday morning when Nicki walked into the church, the usual calm she had come to embrace now replaced with an undercurrent of tension. The service was about to start, and as she stood in front of the mirror in her office, adjusting the collar of her robe, a message flashed on her phone. It was from her old manager. The message was simple, but it carried a weight she couldn't ignore. You need to see this. It's about your future. Nicki hesitated. Her heart raced as she glanced at the phone, then at the clock. She couldn't deal with this now, not before service. But the temptation was too great. With a quick swipe of her finger, she opened the message. The first thing she saw was a headline from a major entertainment outlet. Nicki Minaj takes on new role as pastor. Is the fame-filled life over? It wasn't the headline that stopped her, it was the comments underneath. They were relentless. So she's pretending to be a pastor now? Faith or just a new PR move? Can't she just go back to making music? The comments were vicious, questioning her authenticity. For the first time in a long time, Nicki felt a pang of doubt. She wasn't used to this kind of scrutiny, hadn't been in a while. Back when she was Nicki Minaj the rapper, the public's opinion had been a constant companion. But now, in this new chapter, she wasn't sure if she was ready to face the judgment of people who saw her as nothing more than a publicity stunt. Her phone buzzed again. It was another message from her manager, this time with a link. The words on the screen hit her like a ton of bricks. Sponsors are pulling out of your church program. They think it's not marketable enough. You've already been given a platform, don't let it go to waste. Let me help you figure this out. Nicki clenched her fists, her nails digging into her palms. What was this all for? Was she just another tool in a bigger game? Another celebrity turned pastor to boost ratings and get attention? She had felt so sure when she first stepped into this role. It had felt like a true calling. But now, with everything around her beginning to collapse, she wasn't sure anymore. Her phone buzzed one more time. This time, it was a call. Her manager. She didn't want to answer, but the weight of everything, the messages, the headlines, the tension building in her chest, pulled her in. She accepted the call, her breath catching. Nicki, her manager's voice came through the line, his tone urgent. I've got something big for you. Not interested, Nicki responded before he could continue. I told you I'm not going back to that life. I've moved on. Come on, he pressed, his tone shifting to something more familiar, something that tugged at Nicki's old self. This isn't just about the music anymore. We're talking about you. Your brand. We've got a major sponsor interested in you. This could launch your ministry to new heights, Nicki. We're talking TV specials, sponsorships, maybe even a book deal about your journey from rap queen to pastor. Nicki's heart sank. She had known this was coming, knew that her name, her brand, was still her brand in the eyes of those who had built it. But this felt wrong. "That's not what I'm doing now," she said, her voice cold. "I'm not using my faith to sell a show, to build my brand. I'm done with trying to be something I'm not." Her manager's silence on the other end of the line was thick, uncomfortable. "Fine, Nicki. If that's what you want, then go ahead and keep pretending to be a pastor. But remember, you can't run from the truth forever. You were made for more than just preaching. You know that. You know you'll never really be fulfilled unless you take what's yours." The call ended abruptly. Nicki sat in silence, the phone still pressed to her ear as the room seemed to collapse in on her. She wanted to believe that she had found her true purpose, but there was a part of her that couldn't help but wonder if he was right. Was this really who she was meant to be? The following Sunday, Nicki walked into the church with a weight on her shoulders. It wasn't the same as before. This time, there was no excitement in her step, no rush of adrenaline. She wasn't walking into a world of applause and admiration. She was walking into a room full of people who were waiting for her to lead them, not as a celebrity, but as a servant. And the truth hit her harder than she'd expected. She wasn't sure she could do it. "Good morning," she said as she walked up to the pulpit, her voice lacking its usual confidence. The congregation greeted her, some of them with warm smiles, others with expectant eyes. She didn't know what they saw in her. She didn't know what they wanted from her. For a moment, she stood there, unsure of where to begin. Finally, she found her voice. "I want to talk to you today about fear. Fear is something we all carry, whether we like it or not. Fear of failure. Fear of being judged. Fear of not being enough." She paused, looking out over the crowd. "I've been afraid of a lot of things in my life. I've been afraid of being vulnerable. Of being real. I've hidden behind a persona for so long that I didn't even know who I was anymore." Her words felt raw, unfiltered, and for the first time, Nicki felt truly connected to the congregation. She wasn't just performing. She wasn't pretending. She was speaking the truth, her truth. "But God," she continued, her voice gaining strength, "God doesn't care about the persona. He doesn't care about the title, or the fame, or the success. He cares about your heart. And when you finally let go of that fear, when you finally stop hiding behind the mask you've built, that's when you'll start to understand what true peace is." She let the words settle in. This was the moment she had been preparing for, whether she was ready or not. "I could have gone back to my old life. I could have had everything. But I would have lost myself in the process. And I don't know about you, but I'm done losing myself." A murmur passed through the room. Nicki didn't let it faze her. She was speaking from a place of truth, from a place that felt more like her now than any song, any album, any stage performance had ever felt. "I'm here to tell you that when you face temptation, you have a choice. You can give in. You can follow the easy path. Or you can choose the road less traveled. The road that's harder, but leads to peace. To fulfillment. To a life that's bigger than the one you were chasing before. You can choose to follow God's plan, even when the world tells you it's not enough." She paused again, her breath steady. The weight of what she was saying settled over her. She wasn't just preaching to them anymore. She was preaching to herself, reaffirming everything she had been learning over the past few months. It wasn't about being perfect. It wasn't about impressing anyone. It was about being real. After the service, as the congregation began to leave, many of them came up to thank her. Their words were kind, filled with gratitude for the vulnerability she had shown. And for the first time in a long time, Nicki felt the weight of her purpose. This was it. This was what she had been searching for. And just like that, Nicki Minaj, the woman who had once dominated the stage with her fame and success, had found a new stage to stand on, one that was bigger than any stage she had ever known. Nicki felt the weight of the decision growing heavier each week. She had chosen the path of faith, but it didn't come without its sacrifices. The phone calls continued, messages, offers, and constant pressure from her old life, the one she thought she'd left behind. Each one threatened to pull her back into the world of glitter and fame, the very world that had left her empty in the first place. But it wasn't just the calls from her manager that haunted her. The whispers from the congregation had started to grow louder. They were no longer just curious about her transition. They were beginning to expect something from her, to expect her to be something she wasn't sure she could be. Pastor Minaj, a woman approached her after the service one Sunday, her face a mix of admiration and doubt. "Your sermons have been so powerful, but I've been wondering, why did you leave music behind? You were so good at it. You could inspire so many more people if you brought that same energy here. Why not use your platform for more? Isn't that what God wants?" Nicki blinked, her mind racing. She hadn't expected this question, at least not so soon. She thought her congregation understood her choice, the reason she was here, standing before them. But now, it felt like they were asking her to perform again, to bring the old Nicki Minaj back to life. "I'm here to serve, not to perform," Nicki replied, her voice steady. But inside, she could feel a storm brewing. She was constantly fighting the urge to give in, to use the persona that everyone expected. The familiar buzz of her former self, the one who could command a stage, who could make millions, was calling her. It always called louder when things were uncertain. The woman didn't seem convinced, but she nodded politely and walked away, leaving Nicki alone with her thoughts. That night, Nicki sat in her quiet apartment, staring at the framed picture of her past life, the iconic pink wig, the stage lights, the crowd, and the album plaques that still adorned the walls of her studio. She had built an empire, a persona that had become synonymous with strength, with boldness. She had told herself she was done with it all, that the pursuit of fame and material success had left her hollow. But deep inside, she wasn't sure anymore. She wasn't sure if she could continue to preach truth when her own heart was in conflict. Her phone buzzed again. Another message from her manager. This time, the subject line read, "Urgent, the show must go on." Nicki groaned, knowing exactly what this message was going to say before she even opened it. It was the same pitch, the same offer. Music collaborations, partnerships, sponsorships. "You'll make a real difference, Nicki, but you've got to come back to the stage. The world is waiting." She threw the phone down on the couch and ran her hands through her hair. Was she ready to face this again? Was she ready to return to the spotlight that had once consumed her? The life she had built felt like a ghost that was still chasing her. Just then, her phone rang again. This time, it was Pastor J. "Nicki," his voice was calm but filled with an urgency that caught her attention. "We need to talk." "I've been thinking," she said quickly, trying to mask the strain in her voice. "I don't know if I'm doing the right thing. The temptation, Jay. It's pulling me back. The world wants me to be the old Nicki again. They want the music, the performances, the brand. I thought I could let it go, but every day, the pressure is getting to me. How do I stay true to this calling when the world keeps offering me everything I've ever known?" There was a long pause on the other end of the line, and Nicki could hear him sigh. "Nicki, I'm not going to lie to you. This is a tough road. The world is going to pull at you. People are going to want you to perform, to entertain, to be who they expect you to be. But what you need to realize is that this isn't just a moment. This is a journey. And it's going to test you in ways you can't imagine." "But I don't know if I'm strong enough for this," Nicki confessed, her voice breaking. "I feel like I'm being pulled in two directions. I'm not the same person I used to be, but I don't know if I can fully let go of who I was. What if this whole thing is a mistake?" Pastor Jay's voice softened. "Nicki, sometimes the most difficult choice is the one that asks you to let go of everything you thought you wanted. The world is going to keep offering you fame, success, and everything you've worked for. But real fulfillment comes from a place deeper than all of that. The question is, what do you want? Do you want to be seen, or do you want to be known? Do you want to live for others' expectations, or do you want to live for something greater?" Nicki was silent, her mind spinning. She wasn't sure if she was ready to answer that question, not yet. But the truth was clear, she couldn't keep pretending to be someone she wasn't. She had to make a choice. The next Sunday, the church was quieter than usual. Nicki felt it the moment she stepped up to the pulpit. The air felt thick, as though everyone was waiting for her to say something monumental. She could feel the weight of her choices pressing down on her. The pressure was suffocating, and for a moment, she wanted to give in. To just slip back into the familiar persona, to say the words they wanted to hear. But that was the problem, wasn't it? She had spent her entire life living for others, living for the spotlight, living to prove something. And now, standing here in front of these people, she realized, I can't do this anymore. She gripped the microphone, and the silence of the room seemed to grow louder. The words she was about to speak weren't rehearsed. They weren't planned. They were raw, and they were hers. I'm here to tell you that faith is not just about following a set of rules, she began, her voice steady but emotional. It's about choosing who you are, what you stand for. And I'm choosing faith. I'm choosing to trust God with everything, even when the world tells me I'm crazy. I'm choosing to let go of the fame, the money, the validation, and embrace something greater. The room was silent, but this time, it was different. It was a silence of understanding, of connection. She wasn't performing. She wasn't pretending. She was just being herself. I don't know what the future holds, she continued, but I'm not going to pretend like I have it all figured out. I'm walking this path one step at a time, and I'm trusting God to guide me through it. I'm done living for the applause. I'm living for my purpose. And I want to invite all of you to do the same. Nicki took a deep breath, her eyes scanning the congregation. For the first time, she felt a sense of peace settle over her. This was the truth she had been searching for, the truth that was more important than anything she had achieved in her past life. As she finished her sermon, she saw a few tears in the eyes of those in the front row. Not because of her fame, but because of the authenticity she had shown. This was real. This was something bigger than herself. She wasn't just Nicki Minaj anymore. She was someone else. Someone different. Someone stronger. Someone true. And for the first time, Nicki Minaj felt free. The week that followed was filled with the kind of uncertainty that only comes when you've made a life-altering decision. Nicki had stood at the pulpit, raw and vulnerable, and shared her truth. But the weight of what she had said lingered long after the service had ended. She was starting to believe in her new path, but there were moments when doubt crept in, moments when she asked herself if she had truly made the right choice. The calls kept coming. The offers. The interviews. People still wanted to know her story, still wanted to know about the transition from rap queen to pastor. She could feel it. The world wasn't ready to let go of Nicki Minaj the performer. They didn't care about Nicki Minaj the preacher, they just wanted to capitalize on her name, her persona, the spectacle of it all. She tried to push it away, but when her manager called again, she couldn't ignore it. He had been persistent for weeks, but this time, there was a different tone in his voice, an urgency that made her uneasy. "Nicki," he said, his voice low, "I need you to listen to me, okay? This is important. You know that big church program we've been working on? The one that was supposed to be your big comeback? Well, it's gone sideways. Fast. You know the sponsors we lined up for the TV special? They're out. The people who were interested are pulling back." Nicki's heart raced. What? Why? They're not buying it anymore. They don't think this whole faith journey thing is going to sell. They think it's too niche. They want the old Nicki back. They want the spectacle. Nicki's chest tightened. Her worst fear was coming true. The world didn't care about her transformation. It didn't care about her purpose. It only cared about what they could sell. "This is ridiculous," Nicki said, trying to keep her voice steady. "I'm not going back to that life. I told you I'm done with all of that." Her manager sighed. "Nicki, listen. You can't walk away from this. You're too valuable. We've already invested too much. This is what you were meant to do. This is your real purpose. If you walk away from this, you're throwing everything away. The church. The sponsors. The platform. Think about how much good you could do if you just let us take this to the next level." Nicki slammed the phone down, frustration bubbling inside her. She didn't know who she was anymore. She was stuck between two worlds, one where she was being used as a tool for fame and another where she was trying to build something real, something that could truly change people's lives. She couldn't let the world tell her who she was meant to be. But then, something strange happened. The pressure became too much. She found herself backstage at the church one Sunday, staring at the reflection in the mirror, and a thought began to form. What if I just did it? What if I let them use me one last time? The idea of returning to her old life, the excitement, the rush, the money, it was all so tempting. Her phone buzzed again. Another message. This time, from Pastor J. Nicki, I need to talk to you about something. Urgent. She hesitated. She wasn't sure if she was ready to talk to anyone about this. But the sense of confusion was building, and she needed someone she trusted to help her make sense of it all. She met Pastor J in his office later that afternoon. The church was quiet, the hum of the air conditioning the only sound in the background. "Nicki," he began, his voice steady, "I've been hearing rumors. There's talk that you're thinking about going back to music. Back to the stage. Is that true?" Nicki felt a tightness in her chest. She had tried to keep it to herself, but the pull of her old life was too strong. She wasn't sure what she wanted anymore. "I don't know what's true anymore, Pastor J," she confessed, her voice wavering. "The world keeps pulling me back. The money, the fame, the people wanting to be around me, it's all so tempting. But I told myself I was done with that. I told myself that I was supposed to be here, doing something that actually matters. But what if this is just a phase? What if I'm not meant to be a pastor? What if I'm just fooling myself?" Pastor J leaned forward, his gaze unwavering. "Nicki, I know what it's like to be tempted by what the world offers. It's flashy. It promises everything. But here's the truth. The world will never fill the void. You will never be fulfilled by the applause or the money. The real work, the work that's going to give you peace, is right here. It's about using what you've been given to help others. Not to feed your ego, but to serve." Nicki's heart beat faster, her mind spinning with his words. "But what if I'm not good enough for this? What if I'm just pretending to be someone I'm not? What if I'm not strong enough to give up everything I've built?" Pastor J sat back in his chair, his voice calm. "Nicki, you're not pretending. You're not pretending to be a pastor. You're pretending to be someone you're not when you go back to that world. The one that was built on your image, on what others wanted from you. But that's not who you are. You are called to something greater." Nicki looked down at her hands, the weight of his words sinking deep into her. She felt torn between two lives, two versions of herself. She had chosen this path. She had chosen faith. But could she really walk away from the world that had once given her everything? Before she could respond, the door opened, and a man Nicki didn't recognize stepped in. His face was familiar in a strange way, and he carried an air of confidence that immediately unsettled her. "Sorry to interrupt," the man said, his tone polite but firm. "But I'm afraid it's time to have a real conversation, Nicki." Nicki raised an eyebrow. "Who are you?" The man smiled. "Let's just say I've been keeping an eye on you. I work with some people who've been following your transformation. We think you've got potential for something much bigger than this church. We could help you build a global platform, not just a local one. Think about it. Your story could be the bridge to millions. All you have to do is step back into the spotlight." Nicki's stomach dropped. "The spotlight? Again? You want me to go back to being a celebrity?" Nicki asked, her voice tinged with disbelief. "Not just any celebrity," the man said, his smile widening. "A leader. Someone who can change the world, but with a much bigger audience. We can help you take your message global, build a brand that's not just about faith, but about revolutionizing the way people think." Nicki stood frozen, the conflict inside her spiraling out of control. Here it was again, the temptation. The life she had built, was it really over? Could she really walk away from everything she had known? Pastor J stood up, his face hardening. "You don't need their help, Nicki. You don't need anyone to tell you who you are." But Nicki was already staring at the man, the allure of fame flashing before her eyes again. The choice was in her hands. Would she stay on this path of faith, of authenticity, or would she return to the world that had once defined her? "Take some time to think about it," the man said, as if he knew the decision was already hers. "But we'll be waiting." The weeks after that conversation weighed heavily on Nicki, more so than anything she'd felt in years. The call from the mysterious man had shaken her, but it wasn't just the offer itself that troubled her. It was the fact that she had entertained the idea for even a moment. Deep down, she knew that everything she had worked for, the platform she had built, the fame, the persona, was still a part of her. The old Nicki Minaj wasn't gone, she was just lying dormant, waiting for the right moment to make her return. And that moment might be closer than she thought. As she walked into the church for the service, she could feel the tension in her chest, tight and unrelenting. She had spent every night wrestling with a decision, torn between the world she had left behind and the one she was desperately trying to build. Her thoughts kept circling back to the same question: what is the right choice? She had made promises. To God. To herself. To the people who came to her for guidance. But those promises were starting to feel like a weight, and Nicki wasn't sure if she was strong enough to carry them any longer. Was she really called to be a pastor? Or had she just wanted to fill a void that would never be filled by anything other than the stage? She entered the sanctuary, the soft murmur of the congregation greeting her. This was where she belonged now, or at least, it was supposed to be. She took her seat at the front, trying to center herself, but the noise in her mind wouldn't let up. The service began, and Nicki did her best to listen, to focus on the message, but her mind was elsewhere. She could feel the tug of her old life again, that familiar call of fame, of success. The question still lingered: what if I go back? Halfway through the sermon, she glanced over to the front row where Ava was sitting. Ava had always been one of her biggest supporters in the church, and her eyes were glued to Nicki, as if waiting for something, waiting for her to lead them. But today, Nicki saw something different in Ava's gaze. There was doubt. Something wasn't right. Nicki could feel it. After the service, as the congregation filed out, Ava approached her, her usual bright smile replaced with a more somber expression. Nicki's heart sank. Ava had always been an open book, someone who seemed to get her like no one else did. But now, Nicki wasn't sure where they stood. "Ava," Nicki began, trying to mask the tension in her voice. "How are you?" Ava hesitated before answering, her voice soft but filled with an edge Nicki wasn't used to. "I don't know, Pastor Minaj. I've been thinking a lot about what you've been saying, about what you've been teaching us. I believed in you, I really did. But lately, I've been wondering, are you really walking the walk? Or are you just talking the talk?" Nicki blinked, caught off guard. "What do you mean?" "I mean," Ava said, her voice growing more urgent, "you came in here talking about transformation, about leaving behind the world of fame and performing. But every time I look at you, I see the same woman who built her empire on the back of attention, of spectacle. I see someone who's still trying to sell a story. And I don't know if that's who you really are." Nicki's chest tightened, and for a moment, she couldn't find the words. Ava had always been the one who lifted her up, who believed in her vision. But now, she was questioning it all. "I don't know what you want me to say, Ava," Nicki said, her voice shaky. "I'm not pretending. I'm not. I've tried to leave that world behind. I'm here because I believe in this. But there's a part of me that still feels like I'm not enough. Like I'm not doing enough. I don't know if I'm meant to be this person, this pastor. What if I'm just fooling myself?" Ava's eyes softened, and she took a step closer. "Nicki, you're not fooling anyone. You're just scared. We all are. But you can't keep running from the truth. You are enough. But you have to believe it, too. If you're going to do this, if you're really going to be who God called you to be, you can't keep looking back. You have to step into it completely." Nicki felt something shift in her chest. Ava's words were like a slap, but a slap that woke her up. She had spent so much time second-guessing herself, so much time wondering if she was good enough to truly change her life. She thought she had left the old Nicki behind, but maybe, just maybe, it was that same Nicki, the one who took risks, the one who was fearless, that had the strength to step into this new role fully. Nicki took a deep breath, her voice quiet. "You're right. I can't keep living in both worlds. I have to choose." Ava smiled faintly. "Exactly. But you've got to trust that what you're doing here, what you're building, is real. And if you're going to lead, you have to lead with your heart, not just your past." The conversation left Nicki shaken, but it also gave her a clarity she hadn't felt in days. She couldn't keep trying to be someone she wasn't. The weight of her old life was heavy, but so was the weight of her calling. If she was going to make this work, she had to be all in. Later that evening, as Nicki sat alone in her apartment, her phone buzzed once more. The name that flashed on the screen made her pause. The manager. She stared at it for a moment before swiping to answer. "Hello. I need to know what you're doing, Nicki. I'm not going to keep chasing you around. You're throwing away your shot. You're meant for more than this church thing. Nicki clenched her jaw, her fingers gripping the edge of the phone. I'm done with you, she said, her voice steady. Done with the brand, done with the world that made me think I had to be something I'm not. I'm not going back to that life. I'm not a product anymore. I'm a person. And I'm choosing this. There was a long silence on the other end of the line, then a chuckle. You'll regret this, Nicki. You think you're walking away from fame, but it's walking away from you. You're making a huge mistake. I don't care, she said firmly. I know who I am now. I know what I'm meant to do. And I'm not going to let you or anyone else make me doubt that. She hung up before he could respond, her heart pounding in her chest. It was done. For the first time in months, she felt free. She had made her choice. And no matter what came next, she knew that this was the path she was meant to walk. The following Sunday, Nicki stepped onto the stage with a renewed sense of purpose. The weight in her chest had lifted. She wasn't trying to be anyone else anymore. She was Nicki, not the rapper, not the performer. She was a woman of faith, a woman who had found her true calling. And when she stood at the pulpit, she could see the faces in the congregation, faces of people who needed to hear the truth she had fought so hard to find. I'm here because I made a choice, she said, her voice steady, confident. And that choice was to follow God's plan. To stop running. To stop hiding behind the spotlight. I've made mistakes. I've fallen. But today, I'm standing here, not because I'm perfect, but because I believe in what's real. And so can you. She smiled softly as she spoke, the weight lifting from her shoulders, finally feeling like she belonged in this new role. And maybe, just maybe, this was what she was always meant to do. The weeks that followed Nicki's decision were a whirlwind, but not in the way she expected. There was no media frenzy, no sudden rush of invitations to exclusive events. In fact, it was quieter than ever. The calls from her old manager had stopped, as if he'd given up on pulling her back into the spotlight. The media didn't care about her transformation. They were too busy focusing on the next scandal, the next viral moment. But Nicki didn't mind. In fact, she felt a strange sense of peace. It was a different kind of life now. No more bright lights, no more red carpets. Just the simple, sometimes grueling work of leading a congregation, of standing in front of people every Sunday and sharing her journey of faith. She had stepped fully into her role as Pastor Minaj, but there were still moments when the world outside beckoned, tempting her with the promise of fame, of recognition, of the very thing she had fought so hard to leave behind. One night, as she sat at her desk in the church office, her phone buzzed again. Her heart sank when she saw the name. The manager. She stared at it for a long moment before picking up, her finger trembling as it swiped to answer. Hello. Nicki, it's time we talked. The manager's voice came through, smooth and insistent, like it always had been. You've been playing it safe long enough. You know what you really want. You know what this is all leading to. Nicki closed her eyes, the words echoing in her mind. You know what you really want. How many times had she heard those words before? How many times had she been told what she was supposed to want, what she was supposed to do? No, she said firmly, shaking her head as if to convince herself more than him. I'm not going back to that life. I'm not doing this for the fame. I'm not doing this for the brand. I'm here because I believe in something real now. Her manager laughed softly. You really think you can turn your back on the world, Nicki? You think you can walk away from everything you've built? People don't let go of things that easy. The world is watching you. They want the show. You can't just disappear. Nicki's chest tightened, but she held her ground. I'm not disappearing. I'm just done being what they want me to be. I'm done pretending to be someone I'm not. I know who I am now. And that's more than enough. There was silence on the other end of the line for a moment, before her manager spoke again, his voice colder than before. You're making a mistake, Nicki. You're throwing away everything you've ever worked for. But, of course, it's your choice. Let me know when you're ready to come back to the real world. This faith thing, it won't last forever. Trust me. The call ended abruptly, and Nicki stood there, staring at her phone, the weight of his words pressing down on her. She hadn't expected him to understand, But somehow, hearing those words again felt like a confirmation of everything she had tried to escape. He was right about one thing. The world didn't care about her faith. It didn't care about her transformation. It only cared about what it could take from her, what it could use her for. But in that moment, she knew something more important than any fame or recognition. She knew that she couldn't go back. Not now. Not ever. The following Sunday, as Nicki stood at the pulpit once more, she felt the weight of the decision settle inside her. The congregation was looking at her, but this time, their gazes weren't filled with curiosity or judgment. This time, they were waiting. Waiting for her to speak, to share whatever it was she had learned. Nicki took a deep breath before speaking. "There's something I want to say to you today," she began, her voice steady. "I've been thinking a lot about what it means to choose something. To choose who you are, to choose what path you're going to walk down. I know what it's like to feel like you don't have a choice. I know what it's like to feel trapped, like the world is telling you who you have to be. I've spent years trying to live up to other people's expectations, trying to be what they wanted me to be." She paused, letting the weight of her words settle in the room. "But here's the thing. You can't live for other people. You can't keep trying to prove something. You can't keep chasing something that's not even real. Because in the end, it will leave you empty." Nicki walked down the steps of the pulpit, her eyes scanning the room. "For so long, I thought success was about being on top, about being seen, about having everyone look at me. But what I've learned is that real success, true success, is about being content with who you are, no matter what the world says about you. It's about knowing that you are enough, just as you are, without all the extra." Her voice wavered for a moment, but she steadied herself. "I've spent so much of my life trying to be what people wanted. I've tried to be someone I wasn't, just to get their approval. But I've learned that no amount of approval from others will ever fill the hole inside of you. Only God can do that." Nicki took a deep breath, feeling a sense of peace wash over her. She wasn't just speaking to the congregation now, she was speaking to herself. She was reminding herself that this journey wasn't easy. But it was real. And it was the only path she could walk with integrity. "This isn't just about me standing up here and preaching," she continued. "It's about all of us realizing that we are enough. That we don't need to chase the world's version of success. Because when you walk in faith, you walk in purpose. And when you walk in purpose, you are already a success." She let the words sink in, knowing they were just as much for her as they were for them. There was no turning back now. She had made her choice. She was choosing peace over the chaos of her past. She was choosing faith over fame. And for the first time, Nicki Minaj felt truly free. After the service, as the congregation left, a few people stopped by to thank her, but one person stood out. It was Ava, who had once questioned Nicki's authenticity. Ava smiled, her eyes softer than before. "You're different," she said, her voice warm. "You've changed. I see it now." Nicki smiled back, her heart swelling. "I'm still figuring it out," she said honestly. "But I'm walking in the right direction now." Ava nodded, the understanding between them clear. Nicki hadn't just won her over with words. She had won her over by finally being herself. And as Nicki watched Ava walk out of the church, she felt something inside her shift. She wasn't the same woman who had walked into this place months ago, searching for answers. She had found something deeper, something real. And that was worth more than any stage or spotlight. The night was quiet when Nicki sat alone in her office again, reflecting on the day. But this time, she wasn't looking at her phone, waiting for the next call, the next offer, the next temptation. She was simply sitting with herself, with the peace she had chosen. The weight of the past no longer hung over her. The pressure of the world was gone, and for the first time in her life, Nicki felt truly present. She wasn't Nicki Minaj the rapper anymore. She wasn't the performer, the brand, the sensation. She was just Nicki. And for the first time, that felt more than enough. Nicki's new life was beginning to feel like a paradox. She had stepped away from the lights, the cameras, the world that had once defined her, but there was an eerie sense of emptiness in its absence. The church, her calling, her faith, these were all still there, but something still gnawed at her. The old world hadn't just disappeared. It was still there, lurking in the background, a constant reminder of who she had once been and who she could be again. For weeks, things seemed to stabilize. Nicki preached, helped her congregation navigate their own struggles, and found peace in the simplicity of it all. But that peace wasn't a constant. It ebbed and flowed, like the tide, and every so often, it would recede, leaving her exposed, vulnerable, uncertain. It was Sunday morning again, and as usual, Nicki was preparing herself for the service. But today felt different. The doubt she had been avoiding for months settled on her shoulders, heavy and cold. It was the phone call that did it. Nicki had been pacing around her office, trying to focus on her sermon for the day, when her phone rang again. The familiar name flashed across the screen. The manager. She hesitated. This had to stop. She had made it clear to him that she was done with her past life, but he wouldn't let go. It had been weeks since their last conversation, but it seemed like he had been lying in wait, ready to strike again. With a deep breath, she picked up. "Nicki, we need to talk," her manager's voice came through, smooth and persistent as ever. "I'm telling you, you're sitting on something huge here. You've been preaching and all, but there's still a massive opportunity to take this to the next level. You can do both. You can be a pastor and a global icon. It's the perfect mix. Think about the platform you'd have." Nicki swallowed, a knot tightening in her stomach. She had heard this so many times before, how the world needed her to be something bigger, something more. But wasn't that the very reason she had walked away from all of it? To escape the endless pursuit of more? "I'm not interested in being a global icon again," Nicki said, her voice firm, even though she could hear the doubt trying to creep in. "I'm doing this for real, not as a platform or a business. I'm here to serve, not to sell." There was a pause on the other end of the line. She could hear his exhale, like he was frustrated. "Come on, Nicki, you're not stupid. You're not going to throw everything away. You can be both. You can make millions while leading people to faith. You're sitting on a goldmine, and you know it. Don't let it slip through your fingers." Nicki shook her head, biting her lip. The old Nicki Minaj, the one who craved the spotlight, the one who was told she could have it all, was standing right in front of her again, whispering her name. But she wasn't that person anymore. She couldn't be. "I've made my choice," she said, trying to keep her voice steady, though she felt anything but. "I'm done with all that. I'm here for something real. And I won't compromise that. I'm not going to live for the applause anymore." She ended the call before he could respond, sitting back in her chair, staring at the phone. She wasn't sure if she had made the right choice, but at least it felt like she had done something for herself, for her peace. The service began, and Nicki walked to the pulpit, trying to shake off the weight of the call. She didn't want it to affect her. She had a message to share, a message that was bigger than her past. But as soon as she opened her mouth, she felt the energy in the room shift. The weight of expectation was there. The eyes of the congregation were no longer filled with curiosity or support. They were waiting for something from her, something that Nicki wasn't sure she had left to give. She tried to push through it. She spoke about faith, about perseverance, about trusting in God's plan. But her words felt hollow, rehearsed. She could feel the disconnect between the woman she used to be and the woman she was trying to become. She wasn't sure if she was convincing them, or herself. The moment she finished, she felt an unfamiliar silence fall over the room. She stood there, unsure, waiting for a reaction, but no one moved. Then, a voice broke the stillness. "Pastor Minaj," a man from the back row called out. "I've been listening to you for weeks now. And I want to know, are you really here to serve, or are you just using us to fill the void inside yourself? Because it feels like you're still holding on to something. Something we don't understand." Nicki froze. Her heart hammered in her chest as she turned to face the man, who looked at her with an intensity she wasn't prepared for. The words hit harder than she could have imagined. He was asking the question she had been avoiding. What was she really doing here? The truth was, she didn't know anymore. For the first time, Nicki felt exposed in a way she hadn't felt before. She wasn't sure if the doubts she had been hiding were spilling out in front of everyone, but she felt the weight of it. The question wasn't just about whether she was serving. She wasn't even sure if she had fully embraced the role. Nicki's voice wavered, but she forced herself to continue. "I'm still figuring that out. The man's eyes softened. "We all are, Pastor. But don't use us to figure it out." And with that, he stood and walked out of the church. The sound of the door closing behind him echoed through the silence, as Nicki stood frozen, her breath caught in her throat. The rest of the service passed in a blur. Nicki couldn't focus on the words she was saying, the faces in front of her, or the scripture she was meant to read. Her mind was consumed by the man's question, by the confrontation she had just experienced. Was she just using the church as an escape from herself? Was she still holding on to the fame and recognition she had worked so hard to break free from? After the service, Nicki stayed behind, standing at the pulpit, staring out at the empty chairs. The weight of the question hung in the air, suffocating her. She wasn't sure where she was anymore. She wasn't sure who she was anymore. The old life still called to her, still promised the comfort of the familiar, of the applause of the stage. But was that what she really wanted? As she walked out of the church, Pastor Jay found her in the hallway, concern etched across his face. "Nicki, you okay?" he asked, his voice gentle but firm. She looked at him, her heart heavy. "I don't know. I don't know what I'm doing here anymore." Pastor Jay nodded slowly. "You're not the first person to feel that way. You're on a journey, Nicki. The road to true purpose isn't straight. It's filled with doubt, with confusion. But you have to decide, are you going to let those doubts define you, or are you going to trust that God's plan is bigger than all of this?" Nicki sighed deeply. "I'm scared, Jay. I'm scared of not being good enough. I'm scared of failing. And I don't know if I can walk this road alone." "You're not alone," he said softly, his hand on her shoulder. "And you never will be. But the decision is yours. You can either keep running, or you can walk in the truth. It's up to you." As Nicki walked out of the church, she felt the weight of Pastor Jay's words press down on her. She wasn't sure where the road would lead. But she knew she couldn't keep running from her past, and she couldn't keep pretending to be someone she wasn't. It was time to face the truth, whatever that truth was. Nicki's journey as a pastor had been anything but straightforward. She had fought hard to break free from the spotlight, to let go of the persona she had built as Nicki Minaj the rap queen, but the pull of that old life was stronger than she had anticipated. Each week, she found herself torn between the world that had adored her and the quiet, uncertain path she was carving for herself as a spiritual leader. She had spent years being told who to be, what to wear, what to say, and now she was left wondering who she truly was. The turning point came when Nicki was forced to face the very thing she had been running from, the temptation of her old life. Her manager, relentless and persuasive, tried once again to lure her back into the entertainment world, offering her a platform that promised fame, wealth, and global influence. He told her she could be both, a pastor and an icon. It was the perfect opportunity to merge her past with her present, to gain everything she had ever wanted while still pretending to be someone else. But Nicki's moment of clarity came when a member of the congregation, Ava, confronted her directly, calling her out for being inauthentic. Ava's words cut deep, revealing that the very people Nicki had sought to serve were beginning to see through her. Nicki wasn't just wrestling with her own doubts anymore. She was letting down the people who believed in her transformation. It wasn't about the fame, it wasn't about the applause. It was about her heart. And for the first time, Nicki saw herself clearly. In the final twist, Nicki chose to reject the offer to return to her old life. She embraced her role as Pastor Minaj fully, no longer pretending to be something she wasn't. But it wasn't until the last service, as she stood in front of the congregation, that the true revelation hit her. This was her real stage. This wasn't a performance. The authenticity she had struggled to find had been there all along, buried beneath the noise of fame, and now, it was finally her truth. She was no longer the woman the world had made her. She was Nicki Minaj, a woman of faith and purpose, no longer seeking approval from anyone but herself and God. The final twist. The mysterious man who had tried to recruit her back into the entertainment world was revealed to have been working for a major corporation, hoping to capitalize on the Nicki Minaj brand for financial gain, showing just how much they didn't care about her transformation. He represented the very machine Nicki had tried to escape from. By rejecting his offer, Nicki not only reclaimed her life, but also exposed the manipulation behind the glossy facade of fame. Nicki had finally chosen her truth, one that would reshape her identity, not as the world's icon, but as the woman she had always meant to be, true, authentic, and free.